Welcome, poor mortal, to this witch's dungeon of nightmares. Beware, and gather up all your courage, for we are about to begin.
Come closer to the cauldron, dearie. Old Zenobia's brewing a delectable concoction. Oh, how delicious. Hurry now, drink every drop. The blossom of youth is yours forever, with a beauty sleep of centuries to come.
Hi, this is Christine's Corner. Welcome. Today's guest is Cortlandt Hall.
Hi there.
Hi, from Witch's Dungeon. He did start out in Bristol, but now he's permanent here in Plainville.
That's right.
Correct?
Yes, I started it when I was only 13 years old in Bristol.
13.
Out of our home, and then we later moved to a couple of different locations. Then finally, now we're here in Plainville, and now we're open all year round, which is what's great.
Oh,
yes.
nice. How long have you? How long has this been running? This museum?
We started it. You mean at this location?
No, altogether.
Oh, this is the 55th year,
55th.
consecutive year.
Consecutive. Wow.
We even were going all through last year during the COVID scare too.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, we were open, but Salem was not.
Oh. Wow.
So we were the only game in town.
Wow. you got people that came.
Oh, absolutely, yes. And
Wow.
we were very, very careful with everything as to how we set it all up. And we only allowed in 5 people at a time, so we were very careful with it.
Thanks for the tour of the what you have of monsters. It's quite a share, and you tell me that your uncle.
My great uncle was Henry Hull, and he was the very first movie werewolf in 1935, The Werewolf of London, and that was 6 years before Lon Chaney was the Wolfman.
Oh, that's this guy down here.
Yes, let me bring that up for us so you can see him. There we have Henry Hull, and that's him in full makeup as the Werewolf of London in 1935. The part was originally intended for Boris Karloff, but what they did was they moved up the shooting schedule for Bride of Frankenstein, and the role went to my great uncle.
Wow.
Which I'm very happy it did, because how many people can say their uncle was a werewolf?
Right. So I see behind us the witch.
Yes, this is my own
your
creation.
Focal point.
Yes, well, she was what the museum was named after, the Witch's Dungeon, and that's Zenobia the Gypsy Witch.
Oh.
And when you come through the tour, her voice track is done by June Foray. And June Foray was the voice of the witch in the Bugs Bunny cartoon.
Oh.
She was also Rocky the Flying Squirrel and a number of other characters.
Oh.
So she was a very, very sweet lady. I knew her for quite a long time. She passed away about 3 years ago.
Oh, she did. Huh?
Yeah.
Well, that was a long time.
But
ago.
she's well known here, and as I say, the voice, everybody can hear it when they take the tour.
So you said this is your creation? You made
That's
her?
my own creation. That's Zenobia the Gypsy Witch. And I sculpted her when I was only 13, but in the meantime, as I mentioned, she's had 2 facelifts.
2 facelifts.
I made her better as time went on.
Right.
And she's got real glass eyes, special glass eyes that I had to have made because her eyes are so big.
Wow. Yeah,
And,
it looks so real. Spooky.
And she's got her minions. The raven is Edgar, the skull is Alan, and the cat is Poe. So, so she's
Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes, right. So anyway, do you want to talk about the what we have in the makeup and prop room?
Yes.
Yes. Well, we'll be going in there to take you through. One of the pieces that people love the most is E.T., which was the original that was used in the bike riding sequence, which was the long shots. That's the actual headpiece that was used in that. And actually, he's the only surviving one from the film because the others were made of a very porous foam latex, and over time it dried out and it crumbled. Where he's made of a thicker foam because of the fact his head just goes back and forth, but the others had mechanisms inside the face.
Oh.
That was why. And then another piece that we have in there is one of only 2 original Exorcist heads that were made for the film of Linda Blair, and that was done by makeup artist Dick Smith. And Dick Smith also did the makeup for Dark Shadows back in the 1960s.
I remember Dark Shadows.
All the TV series, yes.
Couldn't wait to get home to watch Dark Shadows.
Yes. So Dick was really, I learned a great deal from Dick Smith, and he was one of the nicest people you'd ever want to meet. He also gave me a headpiece that he did of Dustin Hoffman in over 100-year-old makeup that he created for him as Little Big Man. But when you look at that, if you remember Dark Shadows, I don't know if you remember when Barnabas started to get old.
Oh, yes.
If you look at this headpiece, you'll see it looks like old Barnabas Collins. So, and then another makeup artist, you have to realize that because of my great uncle, Henry Hull, he knew that I was very much interested in makeup and the arts, and so he introduced me to a lot of these makeup artists. That's how I got to know them. And besides Dick Smith, I also got to know John Chambers, who did the makeup in Planet of the Apes, the original Planet of the Apes. And he did the sequel Beneath the Planet of the Apes as well, Altered States, and a number of other films. So between the 2 of them, that's how I learned how to make life-size figures, which is how I did the Wax Museum setting that we have. But we also in there have the original, one of 2 original Dracula rings, which is cast in solid white gold. And the other one was used by Christopher Lee in the British Hammer films where he played Dracula. And as he told me, he said he wore it as sort of a tribute to Bela Lugosi, who was the first major Dracula. That was because this was the ring that Bela Lugosi wore in the films. Yeah. And then some of the other pieces that we have in the makeup and prop room are, we have one of the headpieces from Mars Attacks of the Martians, Ack Ack.
Yeah, oh yes.
Yeah. And we also have a headpiece of Glenn Strange as the Frankenstein monster from Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, and 2 different headpieces from Planet of the Apes that John Chambers did. One of Cornelius as Roddy McDowall in makeup.
I was just going to say Roddy.
Yes. And also Kim Hunter, who played Dr. Zira in the film. And then we have from Beneath the Planet of the Apes, which is also done by John Chambers, we have an under makeup piece where they were mutations that lived underground. They were horribly disfigured by radiation, and so they wanted to hang on to their humanity, so they wore an overmask to remind them as to what they once looked like.
Huh.
So those 2 pieces were actually used in the film. As a matter of fact, the overhead actually has part of the costume attached to it.
Oh, wow.
And then probably one of the oldest pieces that we have in the collection is from 1955, and that is the Metaluna mutant from This Island Earth, which is a huge brain-like headpiece, outer space alien. And if you look at it, you can see where it influenced other aliens and other films, including the Mars Attacks Martians.
Right, it does look familiar.
Yes, yeah. And then also what we have in there is a wax bust of Lon Chaney Sr. Now, he was the first movie makeup, well, I should say movie effects makeup artist. He was also appeared in the film, so he did double duty. He was an actor, but he also applied his own makeup.
Oh.
And he was known as the Man of 1,000 Faces. And so you'll be seeing in our Wax Museum setup, we have the Phantom of the Opera is one of my all-time favorites. So we have the 1925 Phantom of the Opera on display in there too.
Did you make any of these? Did you do?
Oh
makeup?
yes, yeah. The figure that you see, or the headpiece of Bela Lugosi as Count Dracula, I did that. And by the way, this is the 90th anniversary of the movie Dracula, and so I did that headpiece. I also did the one of Lon Chaney as both Eric and also as the Red Death. And the Red Death is quite an elaborate costume. That was made by my mom. She was a former Broadway costume designer.
Oh.
And so I sculpted the skull head, and it's one of our most elaborate sets in there. We went to great pains looking for, this is how meticulous I get. The statue that you see behind Eric as the Phantom, which is Lon Chaney, is a statue of Beethoven, and I've always been trying to get that. It took me almost 20 years to find it, but it's an exact copy of the Beethoven statue that's in most of the scenes with Lon Chaney.
Oh.
And then we've also created a very elaborate organ to go with it, because of course Lon Chaney, or the Phantom, was
Right.
serenading Christine
Yeah.
there you go, with his organ music, and his favorite piece was Don Juan Triumphant. So he was a very, very romantic guy.
Yeah.
And then also from the silent era, we have Nosferatu, which is from 1922. And Nosferatu was a German film, and many of the films made here in this country were influenced by the German films, because they had a certain style about them, and they were really the first to get into the fantasy horror field.
Transylvania.
Yes, and so this was shot in Germany in 1922, and the actor that played Nosferatu was Max Schreck. Now, in German, I understand Schreck means terror, so it's not likely that was his real name, but anyway. But getting back to Bela Lugosi, who's the best-known Count Dracula,
Right.
Bela's real name was Bela Blasko. He came from Lugos, Hungary. He took the name of his town, put an I on the end of it, and he became Bela Lugosi.
Ah,
But this year also is the 90th anniversary of the film Dracula, which was made in 1931.
wow.
And so we try to, on the tour, we try to give the visitors all this information about, the history of the films and when they were made,
Yeah.
and the actors as well. And then, of course, we have Boris Karloff as the Frankenstein monster, probably the best known of all the movie monsters. Anytime someone says Frankenstein, they think of the Boris Karloff
Yeah.
Frankenstein monster. No other version. They think of Boris as
Right.
the monster. As a matter of fact, this year, a documentary has just come out called Boris Karloff, the Man Behind the Monster, and I've got a part in that. They had me talk about it, so
Wow.
I'm very pleased to
Wow,
be in that.
that's
That's
good.
being released nationwide. It's already out. So.
Oh, good.
And then Boris's, we'll just give you a little background. Boris's real name was William Henry Pratt, but he changed his name to Boris Karloff because his brothers were in Parliament, and they looked down upon anybody that was an actor. So that's why he changed his name.
Wow.
But then when he became famous, then they wanted to know him again.
Oh.
And then, of course, we have a setting of my own great uncle, Henry Hull, as the Werewolf of London, and that was made in 1935. And in the film, he played the part of Dr. Glendon, who was a botanist that was in search of the rare moonflower called the Mariphasa lumina lupina. Easy for me to say, But it was the only known antidote for lycanthropy or werewolfery. And little did he realize, when he went to the wilds of Tibet, he was bitten by a werewolf himself, and so he needed the blossom of this flower to be able to change back. So, there's a lot of
I didn't know that story.
It's a lot of sort of Gothic style history to these characters.
Right.
And then we also have David Hedison, who played the original Fly in the 1958 film. He played the scientist Andre Delam, and he was experimenting with teleportation. Unfortunately, he didn't realize that a fly was in the teleportation device with him, so his atoms became mixed with those of a common housefly, and he had the head and the hand of the fly, and the fly got his head and hand, which was pretty,
Creepy. That was a scary movie.
That was The
I remember
Fly,
watching that
yes.
when I was a kid.
And then David Hedison, who starred in that, he went on to be Captain Crane in Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, which was one of my favorite TV shows when I was a kid.
Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Real old one.
Yeah. Anyway, but then,
Didn't mean to say anything about your age or anything.
everybody knows. All you have to do is do the math, and don't do that, please, at home. I started that when I was 13 in 1966, so you do the math, that's fine. Anyway, so then next to that we have Vincent Price as the abominable Dr. Phibes. This film now, this year, is the 50th anniversary of that film. And Vincent Price was a very, very dear friend. And he did voice tracks, which you hear during the tour of the Witch's Dungeon. And he was very supportive of what I did. As a matter of fact, he located the original suit that he wore in House of Wax for our set of House of Wax, because we have two figures of him from the film. One as Professor Jared before he was trapped in a fire in the Wax Museum, and the other one of Professor Jared after the fire. And so the one that's after the fire, this fire-scarred Professor Jared, that one has the actual suit on him that Vincent wore in the film House of Wax, which was a 3D movie.
I was just going to ask you, how did you acquire all these monsters?
Well, that's a rare case that Vincent gave me. In other cases, we've had to recreate the costumes. Like, as I mentioned, my mom did the costume for the Red Death from the Phantom of the Opera because she was a professional costume designer. And then the other ones I have to find. Now, like, for instance, the Phantom of the Opera, Eric, he is wearing a double-breasted tailcoat, which I had to really search for to find the proper clothing for the character from that period. So it's not an easy thing to do, but I'm very meticulous about that.
It's a good thing you know people in high places. Huh?
Well, that too.
Yeah.
So then, moving on from Dr. Phibes, which, I should say a little background on the character. In the film, Dr. Anton Phibes was Vincent Price's name. He was rushing to the bedside of his wife, who was dying. His limousine careened off a cliff, and he was horribly disfigured. But since his wife died, he blamed the surgical team, and one by one, he got rid of them by the 9 curses of the pharaohs, which were not very nice.
No, never are.
So then, next we have Maleficent from the movie Sleeping Beauty.
That
and
must be a new one, because that just came out not too long ago.
Well, no, this is based on the animated cartoon. Because it was first an animated cartoon before it was made live action.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is based on the cartoon version, and that was created by Mark Davis at Disney. And Mark Davis I got to know as well, and he was also the co-creator of Pirates of the Caribbean and also Haunted Mansion at Disney.
Huh?
So, and then moving along, we have The Beauty and the Beast, which is from the first version of Beauty and the Beast, 1946, which was in France. And that the real title is La Belle et la Bête. It's a beautiful film, beautifully photographed. And a lot of the animated Disney version is inspired, shall we say, from...
I was going to say, I never heard of 1946, I just know from the cartoon.
Yeah. Well, 46 was really the original version, and it's absolutely beautiful. And if you really look at the costume, we went above and beyond, I think, to make that costume exactly the way it looked in the film.
1935.
1946, that
46,
was. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And it was a friend of mine. My mom since had passed away. My friend Audrey Wellner, she recreated the costume absolutely exactly. It's all hand sewn. If you look carefully at the gloves, you can see the detailing on the gloves, the gauntlets, they go up right through there. And we had to order special edgings from France and Italy and Germany to do it as close to the film as we could.
Oh, that must have been very hard.
It was, yeah. And then a friend of mine who's an expert hair, he works in hair in the movies. He did the hair work on it, and the hair around the eyes and nose is all done one hair at a time. So that's
one hair at a time.
One hair at a
Wow.
time, meticulous.
Yeah.
And in the original film, I don't know how the actor, his name was Jean Marais, I don't know how he was able to put up with that, but it was like a 4-hour makeup job just to do.
4 hours sitting.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And then also over there we have 2 mummies. I always want my mummy, you know. In the 1920s, you had King Tut's tomb was open. And there was a lot of mystery involved around the opening of the tomb that, you know, it was a curse and people were dying, so supposedly. Anyway, so the Hollywood Studios Universal thought it might be a great idea to create their own mummy that comes to life. And of course, they turned to Boris Karloff as the mummy in the 1932 film. And we have him in the Witch's Dungeon as Ardith Bey. He played actually not 2 parts, but 2 different makeups in the film. He was first the mummy that comes to life, which was Imhotep, and then he was also, and we do have a bust of Imhotep in the makeup room, but he was also then later Ardith Bey, which is the full figure that you see. Then next to him we have a sarcophagus with the second mummy from Universal coming out of the sarcophagus, and that was played by Lon Chaney Jr. And the name of that mummy was Charis. And both of them were supposed to be over 3,000 years old. They look great for their age.
Right. Very good.
And all these monsters in the classic films, they're very romantic guys. They all have some girlfriend that they're crazy about. And
Yeah, there's always a girl in
yeah, there always is. And in the case of the mummy, he's in search of the reincarnation of his lost princess. And then he wants, the reincarnation obviously would be a living woman, but he wants to turn her into a mummy. So that's the eerie part of it all. And then also we have the other version of the werewolf, and that's the Wolfman. As I mentioned, my Uncle Henry that played the Werewolf of London in 1935, he was the very first werewolf. And then later you had Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman, and that was in 1941. So that was 6 years after Werewolf of London. So we also have the Wolfman in there, and they had this sort of gypsy curse going into the film, and that was that even a man who's pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the moon is full and bright. Moon has a lot to do with a lot of this stuff.
A lot of the movies.
Yes, it does.
The werewolf comes out.
Oh yes, yeah,
The moon
and also even in the mummy movies, the later mummy movies, they had to brew these tanner leaves during the cycle of the full moon to bring them to life. So the moon has lunar qualities.
Yeah.
Then we also have Charles Laughton as the Hunchback of Notre Dame, who's looking down upon you. At first, some people don't notice him, but he's above, high above. Well, he was in the bell tower, if you remember.
Yes.
So we have Charles Laughton as the Hunchback of Notre Dame. And then we also have Boris Karloff again. You might notice I really like Boris Karloff.
Yes.
We have Boris Karloff again as the escaped convict, Dr. Niemann, who, shall we say, eliminates Professor Lampini and takes on his persona.
Yeah.
And he, by doing so, he acquires this traveling chamber of horrors, And amongst these horrors is the actual skeleton of Count Dracula. And you'll see that in there. He's in a casket with a stake in his heart.
Yeah.
And when he was brought back to life, it turned into John Carradine. But we've decided not to do that because John Carradine liked to spout Shakespeare, and we thought we'd better not. So anyway, then moving along into the other part of the Wax Museum, we have Claude Rains as the Invisible Man. And as I think I said to you, or
Yes.
the camera, yes, I think I said to you,
Yes.
that the Invisible Man has been here for years, but we just could not get him to put clothes on. That was the problem. So now that he's got clothes on, you could actually see him. So, and Claude Rains was, in the film, he played Jack Griffin, a scientist that was experimenting with the invisibility. But what he didn't realize, the chemical that he used, monocaine, had the property not only to bleach his skin completely out, but it also had properties that could make him mad. And so if he didn't find the antidote, he would eventually go mad.
Go mad.
And so, as he would say in the film, the whole world's frightened of me, frightened to death. Then next to that, we have a little science fiction area where we have The Mole People, which is from a 1950s film which starred John Agar, and he was an archaeologist that was in search of this lost civilization underground at the core of the earth. And it was a split civilization that you had the albinos, which were the lawgivers, and you had the mutations, which were the mole people. And they were sort of the underlings to the overlords, or whatever you want to call that.
I don't know why when you say that, I always think of the time machine.
It is a bit like that, and as a matter of fact, the mole people look a bit like the Morlocks in the time machine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then next to that, then we have also in 3D, as I mentioned, the House of Wax was in 3D. In that same time period, we have the creature from the Black Lagoon, which is everybody's favorite. Everybody seems to love the creature from the Black Lagoon. And the figure that we have was actually made from original parts of the creature costume that were cast and reassembled to create the figure.
Wow.
And he's exactly the same height as the actor that played the creature. That was Ben Chapman, and he was 6'4", and that's how big the figure is. There were two actors that played the creature. There was also Rico Browning, who he is still with us, thankfully, and he played it underwater. He did all the swimming underwater, and then Ben Chapman played it on land. So there were two units. There was one in Florida that did the underwater stuff, and then there was the unit in California.
Well, that's a difference.
Oh, yeah. And Rico Browning, who's still with us, he also created Flipper, if you remember the
I love Flipper,
old Dolphin series, Flipper, yes. And he was also the underwater director for the James Bond film Thunderball.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But the creatures, everybody seems to love the creature from the Black Lagoon.
He was scary, too.
Yeah.
They're coming out of the water.
Oh, absolutely.
I won't go in the water.
And we have also the early headpiece of the creature before they had totally defined what he was going to look like, and we have that on display here as well. And even one of the creature feet, so that you can actually see it close up, which was used in the film.